Hello South Africa and welcome back to the 15th edition of Coronacast, your twice weekly informative show which keeps you up to date with the latest information relating to the coronavirus in South Africa. And today we've got a jam-packed show with lots of special guests to be able to share with you the information that you're looking for. Thank you for tuning in and thank you for participating, and thanks to those who've sent questions in during the course of the week, which we will do our best to answer today. Of course, we're in day 5 now of level 4 of the risk-adjusted strategy by government, and I think we've started to see a large number of teething problems that have emerged. Clearly, level 4 has caused a great deal of disappointment for many South Africans, and we are starting to see a lot of the goodwill that had been established right up front starting to evaporate as people brace against what appear to be some really petty, arbitrary and unworkable rules and regulations. For all of you who've been writing in about the tobacco case, we had our hopes up when the President had indicated that we would be able to have tobacco in level 4, the opening up level of the lockdown. And those hopes were dashed, of course, by Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, the Cogta Minister, who has now indicated that tobacco would not be available during this time, and neither would alcohol sales proceed. And obviously, this has caused a great deal of unhappiness from many of our Coronacast viewers who have been writing in during the week to express their concern around it. Obviously, the point we've made from the beginning is that the only people who benefit from a lockdown ban on tobacco and alcohol is the black market and the illicit trade of these goods and services. If Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, if Minister Patel and others think that cigarettes are not being smoked and alcohol is not being drunk during this time, frankly, they're not bounded in reality. The truth of the matter is these products are all widely available still across the country at a premium. But the big loser in all of this is government, and through government, it's citizens. Edward Kieswetter, the head of SARS, in a portfolio committee meeting of the finance portfolio in Parliament, recently estimated that they've lost 1.5 billion rand worth of revenue to date. That's money that could be being used to buy ventilators, to equip our hospitals, and to pay frontline healthcare workers in combating the virus. Instead, that money has found itself in the back pockets of the illicit cigarette trade, the illicit liquor trade, and all of their connected cadres who benefit from those criminal networks. And frankly, this needs a relook. The other bizarre implication of the level 4 lockdown has been Minister Patel's really odd take on e-commerce. One would think that in an environment where you want to practice social distancing, where you want to limit the number of people out in shopping centres, on streets, e-commerce lends itself precisely to this type of situation where people can order online from the comfort of their own home. They can have products delivered to their home by people using PPE from warehouses where social distancing and the like has been done. I think government missed a huge trick here. Not nearly enough of the economy has opened up, and we're starting to see how this is biting many households across the country. And it's been really a wake-up call for South Africa over the course of the last few weeks to just see how vulnerable so many of our households are. Just 4 weeks of lockdown has brought many South African households to their knees, from the ability to be able to put food on the table or to be able to pay the bonds, pay the rent, be able to keep up with installments on vehicles, repay loans, etc. These are all overheads, and many South Africans, as we sit here today, are very worried and very afraid of the future. And that's not to mention those South Africans who are literally starving because they are unable to access food and unable to get the means to be able to purchase food. Allied with the effects of what is clearly an incapable state. We've seen this week the disaster now around the payments of grants. Many South Africans, grant recipients, the most vulnerable in our society, did not receive their grants this week. Others have been paid twice, and SASSA has already said that they will not be paying grants next month to those individuals. Added to that, the fact that SASSA offices around the country remain closed at precisely the time that South Africans need to be able to access those services to register for social assistance. All of this is what they call in modern parlance a hot mess, and it really needs some intervention from the president to step in and be the adult in the room and start to deal with some of these ministers who are undermining the lockdown. Remember, a lockdown can only work if there is cooperation between the citizens and government. That cooperation is born out of a reasonable expectation that decisions are being made for the best interests from a health perspective and from an economic perspective. When that doesn't seem the case and people see regulations as arbitrary and petty, it undermines that compact. And what you could, in fact, see is that the behavior of Minister Patel and Minister Dlamini Zuma, allied with their colleagues Mbalula, Zille, and Mapisa Ntakula, could well be the biggest factor to undermine the importance of the phased approach to the lockdown. We need to see some change, and we need to see it soon before that goodwill evaporates completely. And it really is time now for the president to step in and to show some firm leadership in terms of getting us through this period. Remember, it's not just about lives. Lives are important, but lives are intrinsically linked to livelihoods. If people don't have jobs, they can't put food on the table. They can't provide for their family. They can't pay for their municipal services. They can't service debt. They can't ensure that they're able to buy necessities, clothing, books, and the like for their family. There is an intrinsic link between lives and livelihoods. And whilst we will certainly get over this COVID virus, what now stares South Africa in the face is an incredibly big mountain of an economic recovery that's going to be required. We're going to require the best of South Africans to get through it, and that means we've got to start opening up more of the economy in a more phased way. And certainly that is what underpins the smart lockdown model which we gave government. How you can open up sections of the economy in a safer way to enable to ensure that we protect both lives and livelihoods. And so that's going to be the focus of today's show. But before I introduce the guests, and I said I promised you a jam-packed show, and we're not going to disappoint today, we just deal with some of the daily statistics that have come through. Well, as we sit here today, there's 7,220 cases of coronavirus in the country, and this is an increase of 2,420 since our last broadcast last week. As of today, we have 138 confirmed deaths, and our condolences go to the families and friends and loved ones of those who have lost their life to this virus. But the good news is we've also had 2,746 recoveries from coronavirus, and that is certainly very, very important. I also want to reiterate some of the things that we need to do to play our part in ensuring that we defeat coronavirus in South Africa. Those who remain above the age of 60 need to practice self-isolation and ensure that they're taking steps to keep themselves healthy and well during this period. That also goes for people who are suffering from underlying conditions. They really need to guard themselves at this time. Social distancing must be maintained. It's very, very important that we try and keep at least 1.5 to 2 meters between ourselves as citizens, whether we're in the shops, whether we're out on the streets, and whether we're performing exercise, which we're now allowed to do for those 3 small hours at the beginning of the day where everybody is out on the streets while the virus is sleeping, according to some of the people's viewpoints. And obviously make sure that we're practicing that social distancing, and masks. Cloth masks, every citizen should have a set of cloth masks that they wear whenever they leave their home and in all public places all of the time. This is a really cheap, small intervention that can be made, but it has a terrific yield in stopping the virus, flattening the curve, and stopping the spread of coronavirus in South Africa. And then, of course, washing hands. There's no substitute for good hygiene. Using a hand sanitizer with at least a 70% alcohol volume, or alternatively, good old-fashioned soap and water for at least 20 seconds. And so today, we're going to address some of these concerns that you have expressed and shared with us during the course of the week. And to do so, I've got some terrific guests here with me. I've got Helen Zille, who is the former leader of the Democratic Alliance, former Premier of the Western Cape, former Mayor of the City of Cape Town, former MEC, wide experience in government and government response, but today heads up the federal executive of the Democratic Alliance and has been navigating the party political way through this particular virus. Joining Helen with me in the studio is the current Premier of the Western Cape, Alan Winde. Alan also has a huge amount of experience in government, and he's going to be talking a little bit about the Western Cape and the Western Cape fight against coronavirus. There's been a bit of disingenuous attempts over the course of the last week to try and cast the Western Cape in some sort of nefarious light as it comes to the COVID virus. So Alan's here to share the facts and the real story about what the Western Cape is doing and why they're doing it, and why it is so important that other provinces follow the Western Cape's lead in terms of finding where the virus is and making sure that we deal with it. And then, because of the social distancing practices and because she is in Johannesburg, my very good friend and colleague in the National Assembly, Bridget Masango, who is our Shadow Minister of Social Development in South Africa. And she's going to be talking a little bit about the challenges that we've been experiencing with SASSA, but also the food security situation in South Africa. And given the fact that there are so many people in the country that are really at great risk of starvation and loss of ability to be able to provide for their families due to the devastating impact that the lockdown is having on the economy, she's going to be sharing some insights around what the DA has been doing to make those situations better. So thank you to all of you for joining us in the studio today. And so I'm going to start with you, Helen, if I may. Welcome back to Coronacast. This is your second visit, and it's always great to have you in studio and to be able to share the insights that you have around government. So let's talk a little bit about hard lockdown. Let's talk a little bit about triple BEE, which has been the big watchword this week. We saw the Solidarity and AfriForum last week were unsuccessful in their fight against the minister. Do you want to take us through why our case is different, but also why it is so important that we tackle this issue head on?
Yes, indeed. We are tackling another minister, Minister Ntshavheni, who was answering questions in the NCOP. Now, initially, Minister Ntshavheni had promised that BBBEE was not going to be a criterion for support to troubled businesses as a result of the lockdown. And they are administering two big funds there from small business development and in the economy. And she gave the assurance that it was fake news that they were going to use triple BEE, and that was basically backed by the president, who was very emphatic on that point. Then in answer to a question in the NCOP, she said, of course they were going to use BBBEE in that context because this whole country isn't transformed yet, or words to that effect. I'm obviously paraphrasing her. She didn't say those words directly. So we immediately got her exact quote, got the question she was asked, and we sent it to our lawyers because they'd gone back on their word, basically. It was a betrayal of trust. And we went to court. Well, we basically first had to write a letter and say, what was this that you said? We are taking you to court. And she was late on her answer, of course, but when we did get her answer, she said, no, she didn't think she was answering a question about the relief fund. She thought she was answering another question. We went back to the exact context and we said, there's no chance that you could have confused what the question was about. This is what it's about. And she says, well, in fact, it won't apply. We said, no, we're not going to take you at your word a second time. We want a cast iron agreement that BBBEE is not going to apply to the relief funding that your department is responsible for, or any other relief funding from government. And we will not accept any answer until you have signed this agreement and until it is made an order of court. So that is where we are on that one.
Well, I think it's important to talk about why we're taking this on. First of all, I mean, it's unconscionable to use race as a criteria for relief in a crisis like this. And I've used the example before, you know, of the burning building, and somebody says, well, we're only going to save everyone with red hair. I mean, it's arbitrary. But also, particularly with small business, targeted relief at rescuing small businesses. Small business, by their nature, fall way under the threshold of income per annum in terms of having to be triple BEE compliant. So you would miss nearly everyone you're trying to assist in.
Well, absolutely. You would miss out the entire purpose of relief, which is to keep businesses going and to keep people employed. I'm following very closely what they're doing in Germany. Now, in Germany, they haven't been corrupt, and they've got huge amounts of resources on the side. And within 2 days, the German government was able to disperse 30,000 euro to every small business. They didn't ask questions. They wanted small businesses to keep alive in a lockdown, because that is how you keep employment going. And in South Africa, you can't separate people on race when it comes to employment. Just this morning, Minister Tito Mboweni was speaking in his portfolio committee, and he, in answer to a question, said, well, it's ridiculous to have this differentiation on race, even in the tourism fund, which in fact AfriForum and Solidariteit have just lost in the High Court. They're going to the Constitutional Court. But in fact, Tito Mboweni came out in favour of Solidarity and AfriForum by saying, look, he knows of a hotel in Magubuskloof. Yeah. And 95% of the employees are black, but they are refused permission for support through the tourism fund because the owner of the hotel is white. That is the extreme irrationality, absurdity, and frankly, immorality of that approach.
But isn't this worrying? I mean, we're seeing, Cyril Ramaphosa and Zweli Mkhize, come out, and there's always a sense of assurance after they've spoken, and then we get
the real story.
Mapisa Nqakula, Bheki Cele, Abraham Patel, and Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who seem to come in after every time he's spoken and just unstitch the whole, feeling that we're all in this together.
Well, you see, that is the terrible thing, and the problem is that their voice always triumphs. These so-called dissident voices. You listen to Cyril Ramaphosa, you say, "Here's a person who knows what they're doing. They're steering the ship." Then you listen, for example, to Tito, and you think the same thing. And then somebody like Minister Kubai comes along and says something completely different, is contradicted by Tito. But from my experience in that extended cabinet, there are truly people who don't get it there. And I am absolutely sure that Minister Ngubane Kubai, the Minister of Tourism, does not get that you are actually disadvantaging the most disadvantaged by saying that because of the colour of their employer's skin, they will not be supported. You have to take this through in words of one syllable, because in their mind, it's 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and that is through the board.
Now, Helen, I mean, you've got a long history in fighting against tyranny, fighting against authoritarian rule. I think that's well documented, your role during the struggle for freedom in South Africa, and you've exposed a lot of the wrongdoing of the previous government. I get the sense there's a creeping authoritarianism that's creeping back into South African society, and people are worried. There was a show of force the other day just outside where I stay, a military jet flying very, very low past the buildings, clearly a sign of intimidation. You see the utterances of Fikile Mbalula, Bheki Cele, Mapisa Nqakula, the defense of them, the beating up of civilians. As somebody who fought for freedom in South Africa, are you concerned that you're starting to see tendencies of authoritarianism creep back in?
Well, I'm very, very concerned, because as they say, the fight for freedom is never finally won. It's got to be fought for and won again in every generation. And, we have to keep very alert. They say the price of freedom is constant vigilance. Now, the Disaster Management Act is actually quite an insidious piece of legislation, because it can concentrate all power in the hands of the executive, and we don't even know who's on this command council that Cyril Ramaphosa keeps talking about. We don't even know who's there and who's taking these decisions. For all we know, it might be Ngubane, and it might well be Bheki Cele, and it might be Ndiwe Zulu. All of these people who keep trumping Cyril Ramaphosa and trumping Mkhize, saying things like we've just heard about BBBEE. So we don't know who's even taking the decisions now. So we have to be very, very careful, because once you give people who are inclined to abuse power, real authoritarian power, they don't give it up easily. That's why Bheki Cele says, if you don't listen to us, we'll go back to level 5. Oh, really? On what basis?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's something you've always shared with me is that, with leadership, you say power doesn't make you, it reveals who you are. And I think that we're starting to see who the real face of some of the people we regard as leaders in South Africa.
Indeed.
Yeah. Helen, just to talk a little bit about, about the regulations. I mean, surely regulations need to be well considered and measured against their efficacy in fighting the virus.
We are trying to fight a virus. Now, we must understand that we will never kill off this virus. We are only trying to buy time until our health system can manage the caseload, and that's why we do all the modelling, and we have to know when the peak is, and we have to know that we've got the capacity to deal with it, and we've got to time it through knowing when it doubles, etc. But the notion that we can kill the virus or expect that people won't get it is frankly absurd. It's measuring, it's managing, and it's understanding what's going to happen when. So if you go into it with that understanding, as any rational government in the world will do, then you don't come with irrational measures. Then you basically come and say, this is the caseload we can cope with at any one time, and what are the measures that have a direct link to the action we want to take. So let me give you one absurdity. It's saying that people may only exercise between 6 and 9. Now good, it's dark in Cape Town, between 6 and 7:30 almost.
And freezing cold in Joburg, I'm told. A lot of the people from Joburg are writing and saying it's too cold in the morning
I'm
at
sorry.
6 o'clock to get
well,
out.
We also can't do it here. So basically you're cramming everybody into 1.5 hours. They all go to the popular places, understandably, and you're really very, very hard pressed to socially distant. Now, even with masks, which I fully support, it's hard to cram everyone into that time. Now, why are they doing that? Well, they say so the police can cope. Why do they have a curfew? Now, a curfew is when you have a war. It's military rule. Why a curfew? Again, so the police can cope. Well, the point of this lockdown isn't so the police can cope. The point of this lockdown is to manage transmissions to what the healthcare system can cope with.
Yeah.
And they don't seem to get it. This is about control. That's what it is, and about authoritarianism.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good time to bring Alan in because, let's talk about some of the measures, Alan, that are being used. I think there's been a bit of disingenuous commentary over the course of the last few weeks. And it's amazing whenever there's disingenuous commentary about the DA, from ENCA and other places, we never get the grovelling apology like the president and Nkosazana got this week. It's just sort of moved on. So let's talk about the myths that are starting to do the rounds, that the Western Cape is losing control of the virus, when in fact the opposite is true.
Yeah, I think specifically the path that we're following is showing that we've got control, that we actually know what's happening. Before this even started, when we were reading about it in the Northern Hemisphere, every country was saying, test, 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 because then you'll know what's going on. Well, that's what we're doing. And unfortunately, we've now got to the stage where we've, over the weekend, hit our peak of going over 4,000 tests in a day. But now we're finding the outcome of the test is actually taking 3 and 4 and sometimes 5 days to get the results, because now it's all getting bottlenecked into a single National Health Laboratory Services. So Norma French and Bomba, our minister in the province, and our health department are busy interacting at the moment at a national level to say, how can we open this up more? Because we're doing the normal testing, that's the screening and testing. We're sitting at over 270,000 screening operations that have happened, and we're nearly at 9,000 tests that 270,000 has resulted in. But we're creating close to 50,000 tests altogether. And the other tests that come in is when we move into a bushfire. As Professor Karim would say, that cluster that was happening, we actually move in and we test around. Up until now, the front line has been police stations, clinics, shops, or taxi ranks. That's where interaction happens. Obviously, now with the opening up, there's some other fronts. But when you pick up a case, you move in, you identify, and then you find out whoever else has come into contact with that person. You test them. And then, of course, your machine's got to kick in. Then it's your quarantine and your isolation. So obviously not everyone can isolate and quarantine, especially in some of our hotspot areas now, like Khayelitsha, like Dunoon, like in Witzenberg. Those are our bushfires. Those are our hotspots. So we've got quarantine and isolation facilities. We've got potential of up to 8,000 plus another one, so nearly 9,000. of those facilities already procured. Generally, our resorts, hotels, hotel beds. And so that system is in operation. And of course, as Helen was saying, the whole reason for slowing it down is so that we can get the curve to a manageable peak. And then is our health response in place. So we've just announced the CTICC, 840 odd bed hospital. It will be the biggest COVID hospital in South Africa.
Maybe even in the hemisphere, I would imagine.
Yeah, perhaps. And so that's actually happening right now. I've just come from the convention centre, meeting with our people there. And we'll be doing 2 more of those hospitals in the city of Cape Town. So they won't be as big as the CTICC, but we've got 2 more. Hopefully we can announce those, finish the contracts this week. And then we've already got 1 outside of the city and probably another 1 or maybe 2. But that's another 1,400 beds, because at our peak we need 1,000 high care beds and 750 ICU beds. We're not going to manage the 750 ICU beds. We are being totally honest about this. But instead of the 1,000 high care beds, we're putting 1,400 high care beds in place. And of course, science is changing all the time. The medical response that we're picking up, we're learning. It's not necessarily the ICU bed that you need. It's actually the oxygenated, and we need some new practices. And at the moment, Minister Norman French Mbombo is sitting with our epidemiologists looking at the new information that's coming at us from other parts of the world.
Yeah. So, Alan, let's just talk about, so if I understand you clearly, the more you test, the better your data set, but the more you're going to find as well. When you go out looking for, I think what Professor Kariman has called the little bushfires, that you want to deal with before it becomes a raging inferno that overwhelms your system.
Of course, if you're not testing, you're not going to know at all. And of course, it doesn't matter which province you're in South Africa, you are going to go up to a peak. That is going to happen. Do you know when it is and when it's going to happen? And we feel that not just doing our random screening and testing, it's actually that focusing into those hotspot bushfires. And of course, what's happening in the Western Cape as well, and the testing is now showing us that we've got now this community transmission. So the virus is now doubling every 8 days. When you hear that, then you quickly scramble, as we did over the weekend. You get all of your epidemiologists and your specialists who've all been part of the team of giving us our scenarios, and we all ask those questions again. And they all say, okay, well, we're still on the right track. We look at our numbers. I think what is happening in the Western Cape, for sure, is we've actually moved. The first part of the lockdown said that we're actually probably moving out into August. I think we're coming back to where we initially thought, that it's going to be end of June, July is when we're going to start to get to that peak.
And that's to start to hit the peak. And so the main focus, and you've got a great new dashboard that's been designed, which is able to give you up to date at your fingerprints a snapshot of where you're sitting at the moment. Do you want to talk a little bit about the
Correct.
dashboard?
I'm not sure if we can put the dashboard up on the screen, but it's open. It's on our website. Anybody can go to it. It gets updated every single day. So every day you'll have an update of the dashboard. You can have a look at the average age of people who've tested. So you'll see people might look at that and say, but hang on a second, why is the average age around about 40 to 45? Well, that's because that's the average age of your frontline nurses, your frontline shop assistants. So you can go and have a look at that. You'll have a look. You will update you at our hotspots. At the moment, it's done by district, but we will very shortly. I will really want us to get the granular details, so you'll be able to even go down to ward level and see what your infection rate is like in your ward, because we need people to be responsible about helping us keep the curve right. So you can have a look and see. But of course, you might also be in the Central Karoo where there's 0 cases so far. And so you can have a look at that. It's got a timeline, so you can actually see the change over time. And we believe in being absolutely transparent about all of our data. And we also will be opening it up to more data so that we'll just make it available to the public.
I think that's so important, Alan, and I'm really, it's great that you're sharing that with people. And I've said right from the beginning, in combating this virus, knowledge is power. The more knowledge we can give citizens, the more powerful they become as a tool in combating the virus. And so it doesn't make sense to me why data sets are not being shared with us at a national level. And so I think it's great, and I would encourage as many citizens as possible to log in and check that out. And kudos to you for developing that. And then there's been a question that's come through here, and it's around the transitioning between provinces, and particularly the nexus between the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape, the travelling to and from. I know that you've had some engagements with the Eastern Cape government. Do you want to just take us through why that is important?
So there's two big areas. The first is funerals. And I still remember that first weekend where you saw these queues of taxis of people trying to go to the Eastern Cape for funerals. Now, you're allowed to go to a funeral. You've got a process. You've got to go and apply for your permit. You go and do that through the police and the magistrates. And people saw these long queues. The first thing I did was go to ask myself the question, how many funerals should we normally be having? And of course, we have around about 5,000 deaths in our province every month. And a percentage will come from the Eastern Cape and want to apply for a permit. There was definitely in our engagement with the Eastern Cape some fraud. Our police, both Eastern Cape Police and Western Cape Police, were telling us that sometimes people were not actually adhering to the rules. Sometimes there was a coffin in the back of the trailer that had nobody in it. And of course, that's unacceptable. We're trying to flatten the curve here. We've got to be responsible. But of course, there are people who have naturally, there's a bereavement in the family and you want to go and bury your loved ones. There are rules around it. It's around how many people can be in your taxi. You get a permit. But of course, the Eastern Cape were worried about that. And the other side is also agricultural workers. We've got professional agricultural workers who work seasonally in our province and then go home and do small-scale agriculture or work in another job or in the Eastern Cape. And so we've already had a meeting with the Premier of the Eastern Cape and the police and MECs of transport. We've yesterday passed through Cabinet a protocol that agriculture has developed. It's now going to the Eastern Cape that they can agree to it. So a certain screening process. And then, of course, that permit can allow, we've got 30,000 agri workers who earn their living here and they want to go home to their family because they've finished with the season. So we must allow for that, but we've got to make sure we've got the measures in place that actually just check that we're not increasing the spread.
Sure. And RT asks a question here. How speedily does the contact tracing team get positive patients into isolation and quarantine sites, particularly those who can't do so in some of the hotspot areas that you've spoken about? Okay,
so unfortunately now our pressure point is when we can't get a 24-hour turnaround on a test. So now we've got people waiting, and of course, I said we've got potential procurement of about 8,000. If we're testing on 50,000 people now, we're going to run a bit short of spaces there. So hopefully, we generally try for 24 hours, but it's now getting pushed because we've got a testing bottleneck. We're also waiting for the 1 hour test.
That will be a huge difference.
It's going to make a big difference. The procurement of it is not easy.
You can get people, you can do the contact tracing a lot quicker, start to isolate and deal with the little bushfire rather than the inferno. Then in terms of PPE for healthcare workers, is there a shortage? Are you able to get stocks in? And is there some way the private sector can help with that?
Okay, so let's first start. We've got 142, I think, private sector companies now on our database, on our PPE database. So we've really encouraged private sector. Education has already procured masks for our whole education system for going back to school. I think 2 masks each now. Of course, there's a difference between a cloth mask and PPE for medical. But there are companies now, we've got great companies in our country who very quickly adjust their manufacture system. We've got about 44 million rands worth of PPE in stock. We've got another 180 million rand on order, and we're probably going to now look at 12 months worth of PPE because we're seeing pressure on PPE around the world. So we've got the new ask. It's got to go to our budget policy meeting on Friday, so we can actually have a look if we can start procuring for a year, because PPE, especially for your frontline medical staff, is critical. We're preparing for that peak. You've got to make sure you've got to have enough PPE for that peak.
And we've got a question here from Llewellyn Prince asking around the high death rates in the province. What underpins that? Okay, so again, we're asking those questions. That meeting that's taking place right now, that's the critical question. Why? And so maybe go back to Sunday. Sunday's discussion with some of our epidemiologists and modelers, and they are saying the numbers are still all in line. The global 1,000 deaths per million, that's kind of what we're working on.
But of course, I look at our deaths compared to other provinces, and you ask yourself a whole range of questions. What I do know is that I analyze myself when I can't sleep at night. I go and read why, and I do know that a fair number of our deaths that are recorded are actually even tested COVID post death. So you could fudge the numbers there a little bit. We're trying to get every single, and I still don't know if we get everybody tested that die, because it's very easy to say this person's died because they had diabetes or heart failure. But we've got to make sure that we actually are measuring the right thing, and it's about testing. But I cannot give you a categoric answer on that yet. I know that we're testing both that we know are in our health system and other people that are dying, and we suspect, and we're testing them as well. But we are busy asking those questions of our professionals at the moment.
So what would you like to get the test to eventually, Alan? What sort of levels do you think you need to be testing it to?
Well, I think if we look at let's use the German model. Helen spoke about the German model. I mean, are we able to get to 30,000 tests a day?
How realistic is that?
Well, we're playing our part in this province, definitely. It could be done. But of course, there are bottlenecks, so we need to make sure we get those open. And I think if we can get these new tests, and also what I really am interested in is the dual test, because what we also need to know is we've got nearly 1,000 people now on our records who have now come through the virus. We need to build that immunity in our system. We're protecting to slow the curve, but we also need to allow it to happen so that we can get on with work. We need to get on with the business of doing our everyday things that we do, running our businesses, opening up our businesses, creating jobs, living our lives, and we can only do that once we get past the peak.
I think that's also the scary thing. I mean, anyone who's seen the presentation done by National Treasury to the Finance Portfolio Committee this last week must understand the real devastation that's to come in terms of the huge economic crisis that we're about to face. I often, say COVID is the hill, we must get over it, but what's waiting for us on the other side is a very, very steep climb in an economic crisis. Obviously, as a head of a government in a Western Cape, this must also keep you awake at night.
And our economy is primarily based on SMMEs, 630,000 SMMEs, where we already think that around about 27,000 of them are not going to make it beyond COVID. Now, that is a massive devastation to an economic system. I mean, it really is. It's something that really bothers us. Our Minister David Mania is busy with our Mania plan. We've got to make sure that we have this let's get the economy going plan. So they're busy working on it at the moment. We've got some really clever entrepreneurs in our system, and we've got to utilize them. We've got to utilize people who are sort of coalescing around what should we be doing that really accelerates our competitiveness to get back into an economic space where we're creating jobs, because we're going to be really put under pressure because of that SMME component. That's the missing middle, especially in feeding at the moment, putting food on the table of so many people who are not able to get a social grant, that can't get a UIF payment back into the system because they were in the middle. And they haven't got food on the table, and they can't even buy electricity at the moment. And how do we help them? And those are the businesses we've got to get back up and running.
Well, that's a good time to bring Bridget in, because that's why she's on the show, to talk about lives and livelihoods. And Bridget, thank you for joining us. This is your first Coronacast, so welcome to you, and thank you very much for making yourself available. And thank you for the work that you're doing on behalf of our most vulnerable citizens in South Africa. Let's talk a little bit about SASSA. Let's talk about how they've served in this crisis, and let's talk a little bit about why social grants did not get paid as they were supposed to be this week.
John, thank you. One would have thought that the experiences of the April grant payment system would have taught the department and SASSA about what they needed to have in place to actually make sure that all those people who wait patiently for their grants, that they receive them on time and in a way that is ensuring that we keep to the protocols of COVID-19, which is making sure that we socially distance, that we have masks and things like that. But surely one could see yesterday that no lesson was learned from what happened in April. And the Democratic Alliance, we wrote to SASSA, to the minister in fact, to highlight these things, to say that these are the people who are already vulnerable. For them to be even more vulnerable when they go to get the support that they get from the government is actually not fair. And the minister wrote back to us and promised us that, they are doing everything they can to make sure that the future payments of grants are going to be done in a better way. We were even introduced to the staggered payment that moved way outside of the month end that people are used to getting their grants, because this was we are making sure that the grant beneficiaries are not in the busy time of the month end when everybody else is buying their groceries. But what we saw yesterday was something totally unexpected, where the grants were not paid to the elderly, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, and also colleagues were saying that it happened here there in Western Cape as well. And those that were paid more than what they should be paid. And it was just something so totally unexpected from a department and an agency that had said that they were going to make sure that they've learned their lessons from last month.
Yeah.
So what we are doing at the moment, we are actually asking the department or SASSA to tell us what is this technical glitch that they are talking about, and how is it going to be ensured that it does not happen again? I mean, John, I can just summarize this whole thing with a comment from a lady in KwaZulu-Natal who said, we have now seen, the government has now shown us what it thinks of us, because it also actually means that before coronavirus kills us, hunger through what government is doing will kill us. So this is a hugely sad thing to happen to the people that are most vulnerable already. And as Alan was saying, so many people are joining the ranks of the hungry people, which then means that government must come up with the social relief of distress food parcels, which is also a total mess at the moment in the country, where you find a situation where the government will stand in podiums and say, the minister will stand at podiums and say, thank you so much NGOs for the work that you are doing. Thank you for making sure that we support each other. And then in the implementation of that very gratitude, you find that people are not being given permits where the permits are required, and food is being confiscated from NGOs who are trying to feed the poor in homeless shelters. The people that are vulnerable are not getting the food, either from the government itself through its processes, because each province has got its food relief programs, and then you have the social relief of distress that is being implemented or that's being dispersed by SASSA. People are not getting this food because the whole running of this process is so flawed, with government speaking in one voice from national, and then provinces are saying their things, and then you have a whole lot of upcoming regulations that are created as people go along. At the end of this whole thing is the people who are hungry for days, John. I've been receiving emails, WhatsApps, telephone calls where people say, I have salt and water to eat with my grandchildren and sleep because we have not.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, so, Bridget, I think that is the point, and for me, that's been, as a public representative, it's been the most heartbreaking part of this virus, is to get those messages, the WhatsApps, the Facebook inboxes, any method people can get hold of public reps saying we're hungry, we can't feed our families, we've got no food in the house, what do we do? And when a country needs SASSA the most, a glitch like this would have been bad enough in normal times. It's 1,000 times worse in an environment where people are desperate for this money. And in fact, this money that wasn't paid over the last few days could be in the difference between a family actually starving or being able to provide for themselves. And that's also why you've taken such a hard line on the fact that SASSA offices have been closed over the course of this period, exactly when we needed them to be open. And you went as far as briefing attorneys to compel SASSA to open those offices. Do you want to take us through that?
Yes, John, when SASSA, when the president announced the lockdown for the first time, amongst the top 3 or 4 services that the president said were allowed was the grants, the payment of grants, and that is run by the Department of Social Development through SASSA. You would then expect that SASSA is at the ranks of the first responders in this crisis that we are in. As a result, they would be there to follow the applications of people that are the newly born babies, the disability grants that are expiring, the grants of the people that are coming into the ranks of the unemployed due to the lockdown and things like that. And it was at that very time when SASSA closed their offices, which is why we as the Democratic Alliance, we thought this cannot happen. This is the time when we need SASSA most. And what was done was SASSA now outsourced its critical, essential service to call centers that at some stage, when I asked questions through the colleagues, I was informed by SASSA that in Northwest, they were running a call center with 3 people during office hours. Those are the 3 people that will receive grant applications or SRD applications only during office hours. When people are looking for help, there was no SASSA to be seen, which is why we decided SASSA must open their offices, because that is where people know where to go. That is where people who even don't have a phone, or when they have a phone, they don't have airtime, but they are able to go because of the footprint of SASSA. People are able to walk to these SASSA offices and get the help they need. Well, we are pleased that through our as you say, hardlining and advising lawyers to take this on, we now are pleased to hear that SASSA is saying that they are going to be staggering the opening of their offices from 30%, and then as time goes on, and now they are busy cleaning sanitizing their offices and things like that. But it did not need to get to that. Sure. SASSA is providing an essential service. The offices should not have been closed. Sure.
Well, Bridget, and this also brings me to another point. If the system was working and running smoothly, and there were food parcel distribution running efficiently and effectively, weren't being hijacked for political reasons and other excuses, one could understand why SASSA wants to take control. But we've seen now, and we're getting a lot of messages through. Timothy Mitchell talks about their church donating 77,000 food hampers a week to school children. Why is there now this clampdown by the government on NGOs being able to feed people? We've seen people being accosted while they're trying to feed the very people that are unable to get the SASSA money into their accounts and are desperate to feed their children.
Yes, it is totally unbelievable that government can say that the NGOs and the families and individuals and whomever else that can help must help. And these NGOs, most of them that are now having so many problems, are well-established NGOs who have been in, if one can call it, the business of looking after the poor and vulnerable. And suddenly they cannot now go and feed these people who are in communities that they are known, because the food must be centralized in government food banks and then be redistributed. Well, we know what happens when that happens, because the food has been seen in many instances in the back of the bakkies of councillors of the ANC, going totally the opposite direction to the one they need to be going to. And so the NGOs are saying, we are not going to be able to centralize the food in the food banks if it's not going to reach the people we have prepared the food for, because we are also accountable to the donors that are giving us the resources to be able to put this food together. Yeah. So the government is talking in two tongues, where it says, go away and help us, we thank you for the help, but then bring the food to us so that we can create all these bottlenecks so that the food doesn't get to the hungry people.
Yeah.
The churches are writing letters to us, emailing us, doing all sorts of things to say, Bridget, please can you guys intervene? People are hungry and we can see them. We take the food in our vehicles. The food is being blocked on the way. The food is being confiscated from us. The food does not reach the poor. How much more can people be traumatized when they are already in a traumatic situation like the COVID-19?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a very good suggestion here from Peter Nell, who says what SASSA should be doing is giving the food parcels to NGOs to distribute. It would be far more efficient and far more transparent. I think he's got a point.
Exactly. I cannot agree more with that person.
Yeah.
The NGOs know this work. They've been doing it all the time.
Yeah.
They are the ones that they know they know even the area, the hotspots where people who are poor are. They can go there and feed those people. They are welcomed by those communities because they do work in those communities. And so I couldn't agree more with that suggestion. It is the best suggestion. It is in fact the suggestion that the Democratic Alliance has actually been supporting, to say, guys, let us use NGOs to distribute food. They are efficient, they know the work, they are known in communities, and they can do this.
Yeah. Thanks, Bridget, for that. Ellen, a lot of questions coming through here about what can provincial and local government do to help small businesses during this time. We've got a lot of questions coming through. What measures have been put in place to help small businesses during this time?
Okay, so I mean, I was just speaking to James Force earlier on, because the city and the province have got the CTRCC, which we're turning into a hospital, but Ladles of Love have turned it into a food factory in CTRCC 2. So the two of us went down to go and have a look. That's a partnership between the province and the city. They've got some toolkits. They've got some different relief measures at a provincial level. The role that we're playing is twofold. The one is, how do we help you if you're finding a blockage in getting one of the 14 different mechanisms for claim that's maybe not materializing on the one side, and the other side is, how do we help you get your business going? So we put 49 sectors to the regulation for level 4, 7 partially agreed to, and 13 agreed to. The others we're still working on, and this week we're actually zooming into sector by sector. But slowly but surely, putting a case together, this is what this sector is going to do to manage the spread of the virus within their business environment, and can we open this up? And so slowly but surely, we really are working very hard to try and get change in those regulations so that we can enable businesses to get back to work. I think that's more important.
And then in terms of the relief, the City of Cape Town have got rates relief for businesses and residential people who have been affected by the COVID virus. And there's some websites that have been set up on the City of Cape Town website as well. So I think viewers can...
And other municipalities. And you can go service at westerncape.gov.za, and they'll feed you into any of those.
Helen, you're going to love this one. We've got a great question here from our good friends at Independent newspaper.
Oh, okay.
So Siviwe says here, the DA has been criticised for using the COVID-19 pandemic to play party politics by criticising most decisions by national government. I thought we had been supporting most of the decisions, but anyway. This is on the backdrop of the only province governed about being SA's epicentre. Well, we know why it's the epicentre. Let's talk a little bit about how we've repositioned the party to be an ally in the fight against the COVID virus.
Well, the bottom line is that the DA has a constitutional role to play, and that is to hold the government to account. And that means we analyse what the government says and does. And that means that where we think it's the right thing to do, according to the guidelines that we follow, and they're always objective and evidence-based, and we certainly put a lot of store by that, we support them, like we did the hard lockdown. We felt the hard lockdown was an important move because we were entirely unready in our health system for the tsunami that we knew awaited us. And so we supported the hard lockdown to flatten the curve, to stop the spread, and to win time. It's the only reason for a hard lockdown, is to gain time. You are never going to kill the coronavirus in the public, and eventually a large number of people are going to have to get corona so that we can reach the peak and then go down, so that you have immunity in your general population. That is the inevitable course of this virus, and no one anywhere is going to stop it. So what we have to do is hold the national government to account by what we know about the scientific evidence. So we did support them on the hard lockdown. Then came stage 4. Now, the interesting thing is that the entire notion of stages of lockdown came from the Democratic Alliance.
Yes, I think they obviously missed the memo on that one.
Yeah. Well, we put our heads together and we said, you can't stay in lockdown forever, so how do you get out of it without then getting the roaring spike again? So what we did say was there's got to be phases, and then we did the whole model on the 5 phasing, which the government adopted almost word for word. But then came the details of stage 4. Without any endpoint, so this is now an indefinite lockdown, it's almost as harsh as 5.
Well, somebody said to me the other day, it's like level 5 with running shorts on.
Correct. Level 5 with running shorts and a curfew.
And a military curfew.
And a military curfew. So it's almost level 5, but with no end in sight. Previously, we knew that level 5 was 3 weeks and then another 2 weeks. Now we've got no end in sight. We don't know who's running the country in this National Command Council. And the actuaries who said in Business Day today, on Business Day website, that more people are going to die from the lockdown than are going to die from coronavirus. Our job is to get the evidence, to ask the questions, and to hold government accountable. We would be a completely useless opposition if we saw our role as being to support everything the government does. And it's absolutely patriotic for us to ask the hard questions. Because the critical thing is what is going to have been right 3 weeks from now, 5 weeks from now, 5 months from now. And then the DA must be judged on, was the DA asking the right questions? Now, to ask those questions and to challenge and to criticize is not playing party politics. It is doing the job that the Constitution intended us to do. And that is why you have different political parties. Otherwise, we might as well just be a one-party state, and all the power will be in the hands of people that aren't named, like in this National Command Council. It'll be totally abused because absolute power leads to absolute corruption and is abused. So our job under the Constitution and the law is to do what we're doing now. And politics is not something nefarious or underhanded. It is what a democracy is based on. So I would think that is it a Siviwe from, I think that's mostly a woman's name, so let me say, I think Siviwe should actually go back and do her homework, Politics 101.
Yeah. Well, I think that, we've also been very constructive during this thing. We've repurposed our entire political operation around being able to come up with evidence-based ideas and solutions which we fed into government. So I think it's a bit of an unfair thing to say.
Well, it's an unfair thing to say, but it's the kind of thing people say who don't understand constitutionalism and politics.
And the way politics works.
I mean, the bottom line is this. We were supportive. When we were supportive, we put in the plan that the government adopted from beginning to end. Then when they announced the details of stage 4 lockdown, we went back and we said, look, this is irrational. This is ridiculous. And of course we have to speak up for the voters. Most people out there think half of the stage 4 lockdown is ridiculous. And we don't necessarily follow the herd, but if there is no causal connection between what we're trying to achieve, which is flattening the curve, and the action that an authoritarian government takes, then we have to point it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, we're going to end on that note. So I want to say thank you to Bridget, to Alan, and to Helen. I'm sure this won't be your last times on Coronacast. I promised you that the last time we'd get you back. And I'm sure there's going to be plenty of issues that arise. So thank you for making time to be with us today and with all the viewers at home. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, folks, that's all we've got time for this week. We promised you a jam-packed show, and we've delivered a jam-packed show. And it's been great to hear directly from the people on the front lines who are dealing with these issues on a daily basis. Don't forget that you can continue to send your queries through to us here at our studio so that we're able to answer them and get the information to you. Remember, the email address that you use is coronavirus@da.org.za. Please feel free to send through any questions, or if you've got some suggestions for the type of information you require answers to. I've received during the course of this a lot of questions about the UIF, the Unemployment Insurance Fund, and the TERS funding. I'm going to get Michael Cardo and Michael Bagram, our Labour people, back in here into the studio so we can have a session dedicated to ironing out some of these UIF problems and why we're sitting with that. They've both been grappling every single day trying to help and assist people who are struggling to get the UIF. So we're going to do that. Remember as well that we've got a really informative website up where we post on a regular basis up-to-date information, verified, fact-checked information, which is very useful. And that's www.da.org.za/defeating coronavirus. One word, defeating coronavirus. Remember our WhatsApp hotline where you can submit police brutality, any other general queries is 067 977 9324. And you can also send any emails through to us at reportpoliceabuse@da.org.za. Thank you very much for all of you watching at home. Thanks for tuning in. And we look forward to seeing you again on Friday for another exciting edition of Coronacast. Until then, stay safe, South Africa.